Hello everybody and welcome back to Let's Play Suzerain. So last part we attended the funeral of Bernard Circas, looked at some potential trade and other diplomatic decisions that we don't really get to make right now. It was just sort of, we're gonna put this in your head now, because some of the decisions you make are going to have an impact on those before you actually get around to actually negotiating the trade agreements. We also passed the God, I'm already forgetting what it was called, the Tourism and Cultural Preservation Act, because it's sort of a no-brainer. Let me get my timer started. And briefing on the results of the Reform Committee. I came a little early to the meeting room before anybody showed up. We had scheduled a meeting to discuss the progress of the Reform Committee regarding the new constitution. I took a seat on the center chair on the vacant meeting room as I waited for them to show up. The reforms were slowly becoming the most significant expectation of my government. We would be changing Seoul's Constitution of 29. Most people nowadays blame the Constitution for the outstanding problems of the country. On the other hand, the reformists in the Assembly had been getting louder about their demands. What I knew for sure was that I needed to do something about this encroaching chaos before it swallowed me. Meanwhile, Lucien, Peter, and Nia had been leading the committee to prepare an initial draft of the constitutional amendments. I was intrigued to hear the results. There was a knock on the door. It was Lucien. "Good afternoon, sir." Lucien arrived exactly on the hour mark again. His punctuality could almost be described as obsessive. "Are you waiting behind the door to come at the exact second?" "I'm sorry, sir." "You seem to be arriving at the exact second for all the meetings." "Punctuality is important for me, sir. I'm just doing my job." "Sure, but if you show up early, then you show up early. You don't have to wait until the exact moment when you should be coming in." He took a seat on the table and took out a bunch of documents, spreading them on the long table. "We should begin the meeting as soon as Miss Morgana and Mr. Vice President arrives. We finally have some results from the Reform Committee." "Oh, how does it look?" "Well, the situation is quite complicated, but I'm sure we will make it work, just like we accomplished many things before. We'll go over the details regarding the new constitution in the meeting." A few minutes later, Peter and Nia also arrived. After a short chat, everyone sat down and took out their notes. I knew it was going to be a long meeting. There was a lot of talk about the future of this process. Let us begin to tackle the points of contention. Mr. President, our committee meetings were really fruitful, and we already started working on the constitutional draft together with the reformists. They demanded a little too much, but we've had success with Friends Richter to create a realistic draft that could potentially go through the Supreme Court. A little? They demanded to rewrite the whole Constitution. Mr. Richter's deputy even suggested removing the term sword from the Constitution completely. I also didn't like their theatrics, but the requests were definitely not outrageous. They were just not realistic in today's political circumstances. Nonetheless, Mr. Vice President, thanks for your convincing arguments. We seem to have reached a common ground already. If we can fully reach an agreement with the reformists, we will be very strong in the Assembly to propose the change. I mean, reaching a two-thirds majority in the Assembly is certainly important as the first step, but we can probably get that without too much of a hassle. At the end of the day, probably the most important thing is it possible to pass the Supreme Court? They are the biggest obstacle. Even if we pass the Assembly, the Chief Justice will do his best to block our amendments. We need at least 6 of the 11 judges to vote for the proposal, but Mr. Hawker has enormous influence over the judges. We should reach out to the judges in secret. Some of them might be willing to break rank to support us. They will surely support a just cause for the country and its future. Lucien looked skeptical. According to the Constitution, I am a member of the Supreme Court, which means we already have 1 vote. 2 of the judges are friends of mine and of similar opinion about the reforms. Consider them with me. Oh, fun. Okay. Who else would be willing to support reforms? I think Judge Edmonds could be persuaded, and in extension, Mr. Dalton and Mr. Merton. they weren't really blinded by the Solist ideology. Yes, those three don't seem to be working directly with the Chief Justice Hawker. If we can get to Isabel Edmonds, we might get the 6 votes needed. That's our best bet. Okay, can we reach a 2/3 majority in the Assembly? Let's backtrack now. If you can get Friends Richter to work with you on this, our only problem would be uniting our own party. We'll never be able to get NFP to work with us. We need the majority of our 130 seats in the Assembly to vote in favor. With PFJP's full support of 70 votes, we will easily surpass the needed 166. But it will be tough to unite the USP with all the divisive wings that have formed. You must make them follow you loyally. Let's see. We did it before the elections, we can do it again. Alban Clavin and his reformist wing would be supporting you. He already weighed in heavily in the committee meetings. However, the Conservatives might be tough to break. The influence of Sol is still living strong in the party. How many votes do they have? The Conservatives have around 40 seats. There are many unaligned people, and some of your loyalists might decide to show their true faces too, so we need as many of the Conservatives to support us. And there's only one person who is key to make them back us. Gloria Tori. She's well respected by the Solists. She'll be our biggest obstacle in the Assembly, and her demands will be extensive. I also have reason to think she might be in Orso's pocket. She will be tough to break, but we'll need her help to get the Conservative support. Okay, what are the demands? We should run down each of the main demands of the committee and get your input first. Miss Morgana can explain them further. We'll start with the first red line. The new constitution will fix the loopholes regarding the president's absolute veto powers. Even though Mr. Richter put on a whole show about why vetoes should completely be removed, the committee has almost unanimously agreed on fixing the loopholes, thus limiting presidential vetoes. My suggestion is to add a clause detailing the methods the Assembly may override a veto with some sort of supermajority. One person should never be able to block the rest. That certainly is reasonable. The loopholes give the president too much power, which can be misused. Whatever you decide, it's important to get a balanced picture. We will be making history by changing the 29 Constitution of Sol. The second one is about the judiciary. The new Supreme Court will remove the the new Constitution will remove the Supreme Court's right to vote on legislation. This is yet another point that was unanimously agreed on by all parties. Tarkin Sol established this rule to protect his 29 Constitution. We all know most of the judges are still his pawns. Constitutional amendments will still be very difficult to accomplish with a reform like this, particularly because we will keep the 2/3 vote system to be able to propose a change. However, the judiciary will not have final say in the amendments. This is already what we wanted to do. Yes, this will ensure that there won't be another politically motivated Supreme Court. Apart from these two critical points, they have other major demands. They want to reform the appointment process of the ministers. Mr. Richter clarified that the Assembly should have a say in the formation of the Council of Ministers. That is something that a majority in our party also supports. Well, Mr. Richter also talked about abolishing the Member of Honor rights of Tarkin Sol. That gives him absolute immunity and makes him a permanent member of the Assembly. Well, that one is a controversial one. I doubt the USP would like that. Immunity of the justices, the impeachment of the president, limiting the power of the presidential decrees, all of this came up during the committee meetings. Yes, reformists expect big reforms, while our faction and the USP are not too keen on pushing changes that are too great. I'd say keeping everything in the middle ground is the safest bet. No need to agitate anyone too much. I agree. Let's keep the changes small and manageable. As long as we address the main issues, I also agree. Well, regardless of what Mr. Rain decides, we will need to work together to push this agenda. Now we have a better picture of your intentions, sir. I will start reaching out to my contacts to make a draft that works for us. I'll present your input to the committee. In a few months, you would have the draft on your desk to make the final changes yourself. I think this was yet another fruitful meeting, sir. Let's see. Together we will democratize Sordland. And you have my full support, Mr. President. Ours too, of course. Yes, sir. Thank you for your time. I think this is where we'll call it, sir. Have a good day. Nature preservation protests in Morbel. Incident at President Sol's mansion on Duru Island. Interesting. So what do we have? Minister Manager's Rural Development Divisions. Of the Gruni Rural Development Investment, the plan envisions judicious resource allocation to invigorate agricultural communities, strengthen food security, and bolster the regional economy of Gruni. That doesn't sound bad. Cooperation with Rumburg and economic imperative. Yeah, no, I don't really care to integrate ourselves in any capacity with Rumburg if we can avoid it. Job-free spark spheres for Gasom's financial stability. That's not great. WPB protests the electoral bill. New bill means that WPP lost half their total vote party funding, and since they couldn't pass the high election threshold of 10% to enter the assembly, aren't eligible at all to receive any public election funding for the 1957 elections. The WPP leader said that the workers' struggle continues and they are willing to explore other options to be able to represent the hundreds. That doesn't sound great. Okay, nothing particularly new there from what I can see at a glance. Taurus Holdings reported that preparatory work for the H3 highway has already started, including clearing land and demolishing buildings in the path of the future roadway. Construction of the highway will be starting in the next months, working west from Lockhaven. Good, good, good. Okay. I don't recall seeing that there before, but it was probably always there, and I'm just completely failing to remember it being there before. Oh, good. That's actually helpful. I can see what what decisions I made if I forget. Okay, meeting with Chief Justice Orso Hawker. See, the department sent several documents which required my signature so they could start working on the new decisions that were taken. After I signed dozens of them, I closed my eyes to relax for a moment. Another long day, even though I really wished to leave the palace, blah blah blah. We planned to meet in my office in 30 minutes. I waited for him, wondering what subject he would raise. Let's pour ourselves a whiskey and take a sip. Ease our mind a little. Sudden knock on the door. Lucian, good evening, sir. Let's see, good evening, Lucian. I'm sorry that I couldn't explain the situation to you in detail earlier, sir. The Chief Justice insisted on meeting you this evening. I do not know what he has to say, but it will probably be about the new constitution. He'll be coming shortly with Judge Mr. Garasi to the meeting. We shouldn't take them lightly. I think he's here to test the waters. I agree. They'll probably try to get you on their side. We should... There were 3 knocks at the door. Lucian checked his watch. He looked rather worried. Livia opened the door as Chief Justice Orso Hawker and Judge Hiran Garasi entered the room. Good evening, Mr. President. It's great to see you, evening. Welcome, Justice Garasi and Chief Justice Hawker. Good to see you indeed. Orso gestured the sofa in the office. May I? Please. We all took our seats on 2 opposite sofas and made ourselves comfortable. Orso glanced at the glass of whiskey. Celebrating something, Mr. President. Forgive me, would you also like to have a drink? No, thank you. Me neither, thank you. I'd like to start as concise and focused as I can. How are your first couple of months, Mr. President? I hope you're faring well. Thank you. It's very busy, but I'm doing good. It will only get busier, yet I think you're doing a good job so far. Considering all that's happened around us, with the shootings near the palace and soldiers on our borders, he lets out a deep sigh. It is a troubling time. We appreciate your concerns. So, you probably know why we're here. Please enlighten us, Mr. Hawker. We know you are working on a new constitution. The Supreme Court does not approve of this. With all due respect, the Constitution needs to be updated, sir. I am sure you are well aware of the public demand and our circumstances. Is that so? I see that you are the one who is not aware of our actual circumstances. You want to make a weaker constitution in the midst of problems from both inside and outside. Even if your proposal passes the Assembly, I will make sure it will not pass the Supreme Court. That much is clear. You haven't even seen the proposal yet, Mr. Hawker. Isn't it too soon to be against it? Do you think I live under a rock, Mr. President? I know what goes on. Yet you, Mr. President, seem to be only partially informed about the current situation. Please let us explain the reasons for our stance. Oh, please explain. We are protecting the Constitution because it works, Mr. President. It is efficient and it gives you the authority to lead the nation with swift decisions. Sordland has more important problems and threats that we should focus right now instead of nitpicking about some paragraphs of the Constitution. We have potential war within our borders. Urso signaled Heron with his hand to let him speak instead. Mr. President, I know that you are a busy man, so I'll make this quick. We all know that Swordish security forces found stashes of Rumburgian weaponry in the hideouts of British separatists. KA-74s are roaming inside Sordland at this moment. As much as Rumburg poses a direct threat, now it's clear that they are also intervening in our country and weaponizing our minorities against us. It's not unprecedented to think that the Bloods will start their terror again with their new toys, not to mention the fights that broke out between the left and right wing after the shooting of Bernard Cercas. Communists are rising with the support of United Contana. The chaos is imminent for Sordland. We sadly don't see the administration taking the necessary precautions. You said you will not focus on military during your term. Under current circumstances, that cannot be tolerated at any cost. Let's see. Mr. Hawker, the court has no jurisdiction over these matters. Aren't we all part of this state, Mr. President? We are all responsible if Sordland fails to overcome these threats. But regardless of that, are you also aware that the armed British separatists have direct connections with the Workers' Party of Bludia? Let's see. The Workers' Party is a democratic party. Unlike the militias, they are not the same. They may claim that they have no ties with the separatists, but most of their members used to be part of them before they formed the Workers' Party of Bludia. Okay. How about the name, Mr. President? It is not the Workers' Party of Sordland, is it? As far as I'm aware, there is no nation called Bludia around here. What is this all about? The only reason they are not in the Assembly is because of the electoral threshold. They have gotten quite big. They are clearly getting outside help, and their connections to the paramilitary British force cannot be denied. And all of a sudden, the reformists are trying to decrease the electoral threshold so that the British separatists can be legitimized in the Assembly to achieve their aims of independence. You think that's Mr. Richter's intention? I suspect his intentions are grander, but I wish the only issues were the British terrorists and Rumburg. The reformist suggested changes would also bring the communists who are backed by United Contana into the Assembly. Do you see the pattern yet? I apologize, gentlemen, but I am not a conspiracy theorist. This is not a conspiracy theory. Haven't you been briefed by your security teams? Maybe you should suspect them as well. We should take the necessary measures against communist and British plots, as well as increasing our military budget against a possible conflict with Rumburg. And of course not fall into the traps of the reformists by listening to their demands. They are clearly plotting to weaken the president and our whole administration in order to exploit the situation. Which brings us to some very important information that we have. It's definitely something you need to hear, and it can change absolutely everything. With all due respect, Mr. President, I think this is getting slightly ridiculous. Please explain, Mr. Hawker. The person in question is Mr. Franz Richter himself, the leader of the reformists. We have enough information to infer that he has ties with Arcasia. Arcasia is aggressively growing their influence around the world, and now we have Mr. Richter coming up with these ridiculous demands for a new constitution amidst the chaotic period in Sordland. All the pieces seem to fit perfectly. That is why the Supreme Court will be doing what it takes to stop these reforms and preserve the Constitution. How would you know that Mr. Richter has ties to Arcasia? Mr. Galade. We all know he has been in Arcasia many times because it's been documented. But what would you think if he has been making hidden flights to the country? Explain. He has been spotted in a hotel in Arcasia last year, where they held the Conference on Economic Development in Volatile Regions. Right around that time, he started to influence the masses into believing that our Constitution is the reason for everything bad. His trip was not documented, nor was he an official guest of the conference. We believe that he had a meeting with President Walker behind closed doors. I also have a couple more photos of him that were taken in Arcasia in different cities. One is from a couple months back. Again, none of it is documented. He has also attended another event in Lispia last week. The Arcasian Minister of Foreign Affairs was there too. And how did you find out about this? Many Solists were already following his leads for quite some time, Mr. President. I cannot give away their identities, but I can give you the evidence. He handed me a small file. It contained official documents from the Swordish Border Guard with highlighted dates that showed no trace of Franz Richter's name. There were clear photos of him that were taken in the conference in Arcasia, as well as remarks by Lispia and Arcasian citizens who claimed to have seen him with Arcasian businessmen around the same dates. There was also an official transcript of one of his speeches where he claimed to be in Benfi on the dates of the conference in Arcasia where he was spotted. Lucian skimmed through the documents with skepticism, which slowly turned into surprise. These seem to be real. Of course they are real, Mr. Galade. These seem to suggest that Arcasia is behind the reformists. Their demand will only benefit Arcasia. They want us to have a weaker administration while we face all these threats. This is clearly a plot against Sordland. I bet Rumburg is part of their plan too. This cannot be a coincidence that they are weaponizing our minorities against us around the same time. Now you understand the reasons for our current stance. And also our suspicions about your advisors, who clearly have not given you this vital information. Lucian gave him a sharp look. We appreciate the information, Mr. Hawker, but I advise against jumping to conclusions right away. We still need to check the information. There's not much to think or check. This is clearly an emergency. In such cases, the Constitution gives the President the right to use his emergency powers. If we work together, we can be sure that the Supreme Court will not block your declaration of emergency. You want me to declare an emergency? Of course. We cannot wait for the process of the Assembly to take care of these issues. We must exercise your presidential powers for a fast and effective solution, which means you might need to suspend parts of the Constitution to give more authority to our security forces to deal with these issues. We must officially investigate Mr. Richter as well. You can devise a strong security decree if you can base it on the Articles 57 and 58, which gives the President the right to suspend parts of the Constitution to deal with national security threats. You can directly bypass the Assembly in such a situation. The only thing you need is the Supreme Court to allow the emergency to be declared, and you have our word on that. Sir, I think this is going a bit too far. We shouldn't escalate things so fast. Mr. President, why don't we talk in private, only two of us? We can devise a plan together. I know how we can use the Constitution to our advantage. It would be more effective if Mr. Galade and Mr. Garasi leave the room before we discuss it. Sir, I advise against it. Regardless of our situation, let's see. No, I'm sorry to say that we won't be cooperating, Mr. Hawker. Even though you are aware of our national security threats, you are making a big mistake, Mr. President. We will not allow you to succeed. Gentlemen, I think it's about time to end this meeting. Well, thank you for having us, Mr. President. Have a good evening. They both left the room without saying anything else. That was not good. They clearly tried to threaten you. We need to take care of them, or so we'll be doing whatever it takes to damage you. We need to be careful. There are still many old guard sympathizers in our party. We can't let them divide our party. And he will definitely try. After a short evaluation of the situation on our hands, Lucian left me in the presidential office. It was obvious that the old guards would be my main rivals in the near future. Hawker and Maroon Palace, okay. let's continue. Okay, we got a bunch of news stories. Let's see. Red Youth rises, warning bells for Sordland. Okay. School poisoning in Rybell. Well, that's not fun. 12 students died after eating a free meal laced with pesticide. Why the fuck was it laced with pesticide? Upcoming government budget changes. Okay, yeah. Worker unions put pressure for promised benefits. Let's see. Okay. United in protest. Time for women to stand up. Women in Sordland have always been under pressure by the unequal society and the system of discrimination that was built by old men who only knew about war, said Katrina Horton in a women's rally that was held in Holsard yesterday. The Swordish League of Women is organizing a number of rallies against Sordland to bring the change Sordland desperately needs. It is time for Sordland to realize that we have to respect every individual regardless of their sex and strive to become an advanced civilization. Women have long been pushed to the corners of the social and political life. Let's see. Started all over Sordland to establish a framework for women's rights. Yep, got no problems with that. Questioning soulless education. Sordland was rated 39th out of the 68 nations that were assessed by the OMEC organization. The Organization for Marcopan Economic Development. Okay, yep. Yeah, soulless education probably isn't the greatest. And Raqqa emerges as buffer zone and global trade power. Great nations unite to counter ideological influence, forge parallel financial order. Van Horten blames Vogsland for the missing fishing vessel. Widespread protests here. Communist books burned in Boran. Bluish resistance in sanctuaries in Sarna. Narbel reports a lack of hospitals. Recession hits farmers again as it reports that 16% of all wheat in Lochhaven is rotting in barns due to a lack of buyers. Farmers are requesting additional funds from the government to survive the year. Young Swords and NFP flags burned in Erlori. Legislative to bid on the repeal of the EPA. Arguments both for and against the repeal were put forth. Let's see. They argue that such a move would foster economic growth and increase foreign investment. However, the United Party of Sordland and National Front Party, under the leadership of Gloria Tori and Kasara Kibnir, respectively defended the act vehemently, citing the need for Sordland to protect its strategic industries from foreign control. The final decision now hinges on the vote, which will be held the following month. Okay, let's do a barbecue with Frank. It was a Saturday afternoon, first break from work in what felt like years, and the weather couldn't have been more perfect. Trying to keep my mind off the upheaval sparked by the Circus assassination, I lit the backyard grill. Monica and Deanna were out shopping for craft supplies, and I'd given the staff the day off. It was just myself and Frank at home. I wasn't sure how he felt about me at the moment, but I did know how he felt about barbecued ribs. Our cook had left some marinating in the refrigerator. Sure as enough, as soon as Frank glimpsed the grill and the meat, he stepped inside to join me. Come to spend some quality time with your old man, have you? Sure, if you can spare a few minutes out of your busy schedule. I'm sorry, I know I haven't been around very often lately, but I'm happy to see you now. It's okay. I know you've got the most stressful job in the country, and you've got to feed your family on top of it all. We both chuckled. I turned to tend to the fire. Here, let me try. He grabbed the fan and started quickly waving it over the coals. The fire roared to life. He turned to look at me with a grin on his face as if he was expecting praise. Good job. Thank you, sir. It is our utmost interest to fulfill our duties with precision. The grilling shall commence in exactly 1 minute and 32 seconds. That was a spot-on impersonation of Lucien. We looked at each other for a second, then burst out laughing. I realized my throat was parched. There was a 6-pack of beer in the kitchen. Let's see. Why don't you get us a couple of beers? He looked at me in disbelief. You mean I can't? But Mom told me. He stopped himself, quickly ran inside and returned with 2 beers. We cracked them open, clinked the bottles and gazed at the city skyline. For a moment, my thoughts flashed back to my childhood and my relationship with my own father. My father was a rich man. We never had to worry about food, clothes, or anything else. Yet he was nearly always away, and constantly distracted on the rare occasions when he was at home. Now that I was the president, I was worried that I would end up just like my father, distant and absent from Frank's life. Dad, can I ask you something? We're family, you can ask anything. It's just, I feel like there's so much you've been hiding from me about your past, about what's going on right now. Like at dinner that night after the ball, you told me everything was under control, but it wasn't, was it? I know what happened in the 20s. We learned all about it in school. Now with the protests and the riots, is it going to be the same thing? Dad, is there going to be a civil war in Sordland? No, I will never let that happen. Good. But what was it like back then? Uncle Peter said that the two of you went through a lot. I'm not a kid anymore, you can tell me. Before I could gather my thoughts, the familiar images started flashing before my eyes, images of soldiers advancing towards me and my friends, weapons drawn, of people I knew, friends and neighbors being dragged through the streets and murdered in alleyways, the shock and grief on the faces of fathers, mothers, and orphaned children. Those were dark times. It seems like it. But you're nearly a grown man. Let's talk about it. Frank leaned forward in his chair, his eyes wide. Let's see. Tell Frank about the coup of 1927. I was barely older than you are now. Studying law at the Hulsard State University, I was a freshman, excited and young. I had just left the classroom to go back home as I heard the sound of multiple vehicles approaching the campus gates. As they got closer, I realized they were military camouflaged trucks and tanks carrying hundreds of soldiers. The same soldiers that were supposed to protect Sordland citizens pointed their guns at us. They immediately took control of the facilities. One of my friends asked what was going on and was arrested immediately. More people got angry and gathered in protest. Frank kept listening, a shocked look on his face. Tell him about the soldiers beating me. I was there with the protesters as they declared martial law. We marched towards them. They threatened to use force, but we stood our ground. So they started beating anyone they saw, including me. The physical wounds took a few weeks to heal, but the mental scars have stayed with me to this day. I stayed strong. I tried my best to stay strong. Some of my friends were shot. Many more were arrested. I can't forget the screams to this day, but I'm proud not to have faltered. Frank leaned back in his chair, his shoulders slumped heavily. Let's tell him about the Civil War. It was right after I met your mother. We had both joined the student council to push for change after the coup of 27, but over the next year, the state of Sordland deteriorated. People started picking sides, and I tried to stay away as much as I could. Then, one night it happened. 2 different factions in the army, one of them led by fascist General Lutheran and the other by socialist General Ricard, started fighting against each other. It was a bloodbath. Nowhere was safe. Frank shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. People organized protests either for or against Ricard. I heard about the clashes the next day. Many of my friends were shot or arrested. I isolated myself for months. That's enough for today. It's okay. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked you about it. I know I don't understand how easy my life is sometimes. One more thing, though. I know that you managed to not take any sides. Do you mind if I ask why? They're 2 sides of the same coin. Frank raised his eyebrow, his curiosity still not satisfied, but sensing my reluctance to go on, he simply nodded. Sorry for bombarding you with questions. I know I complain sometimes, but my problems are nothing compared to what you went through. I'm here to listen to them, no matter what they are. Before Frank could say anything else, I heard the front door unlock. Deanna and Monica's voices and the sounds of rustling shopping bags filled the house. Alright, I'll be upstairs until dinner. Frank went in and dashed upstairs. I took a long sip from my beer, looking at the city and the now setting sun. I hoped that talking to Frank about my past had been the right decision. Part of me felt as if some sort of burden had been lifted. But I had the same nightmares again that night. Damn, lots of news articles again. Green Act, a misdirected effort. Attacker opened fire on protesters in Vesord. 17 dead. The attacker killed himself right after shooting at 25 people, killing 16. Tourism bill signing deserves applause. You guys, I think, are a bit late on reporting on that. Green Act, a threat to growth. Gasom in turmoil. Leadership crisis. Resian Oil and Gas expresses interest in Gasom. FC Gelsword. SC Enrica Derby postponed due to protests. The imperative Green Bill awaits signature. Undemocratic elections of Sordland. CSP's worker report under scrutiny. Enraka broadens economic horizons. Okie dokie. Low industrial output in Morna. Yep. And industrial output numbers this year are 12% lower than last year. That's not great. It's not great at all. Many members of the USP, led by Albin Clavin and the reformist wing of the party, clarified their demands from the government and the party Congress for the upcoming constitutional reforms. Albin Clavin stated that without ministry reforms, they won't be able to stand behind the new reform package. That's okay. I don't really mind giving you guys that. Prisoners riot in Antel Rock Prison. 4 guards and 21 prisoners dead, 134 injured. That's not great. Looks like we get some national stuff to take a look at. Resian Oil and Gas has extended a co-investment proposal for Sordland's ambitious Gasom energy venture. Okay, sounds nice. ATO pledges financial and military aid to Agnolia. Okay, here we go. We're wanting to improve our relations with Agnolia. And we also want to improve our relations with the ATO. And the ATO is improving their relations with Agnolia. So, you know, both of them are 2 thumbs up from us. It's going to significant financial and military aid to Agnolia. Look in the heart of Eastern Macopa, region rife with geopolitical complexities. This aid package is designed to enhance Agnolia's economic stability and bolster its military capabilities, fortifying it against possible CSP advances and further Rumburg hostilities as part of the ATO's larger goal to secure its capitalist allies against the spread of socialism. This assistance displays the ATO's commitment to supporting its member nations in their time of need. But didn't you guys seem to imply that the Agnolia wasn't super keen on us picking a side? I swear when we were doing the diplomatic stuff last part, they had implied that my decision to align towards the ATO was something that Agnolia was not exactly fond of. But now all of a sudden Agnolia is getting military and economic aid from the ATO. Okay, sure. I feel like that's a bit silly for us to be acting as if that's they're not exactly too keen on that type of thing. I think we're going to go and probably end this part here because this decision is going to go for a bit. And I got 6 minutes left on my timer, and I do not think that we would finish this event within that 6-minute time frame. So we're going to end this part here. I will see you all next time, where we will be visiting Narbel out here. It may not actually be that long of an event, I really do not recall, but just to be on the safe side, we're going to go ahead and end this part here. I will see you all next time. Until then, goodbye and farewell.